Hello, hello, hello. What's happening? It's Brian Dawson checking in, K97.5, afternoon radio personality. I'm so excited about these brand new segments that we've been doing to tackle important issues in our community. It's called Triangle Empowered. Of course, it's January, new year, same subjects, and they're getting more and more serious. So we have to get an expert in here, and just so happened to be a good friend of mine. I only talk to you every day. So first of all, let me fully tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Okay. So, yes, Brian, my name's Kiricka Yarbough Smith. I am the Director of Human Trafficking Programs for the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement Office, which is under the Department of Administration. Way too long of a title.
No. That's important. And I do want to definitely start off by giving you, your flowers. You're not asking for this, but you're very passionate at what you do. This is what we need. The information is very serious, and our job is just to affect at least one person. So we'll get right down to it now. Why don't victims often report their abuse?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Brian. And to me, it's so many different points to that. But I think one of the first things is something, if people have been able to hear some of our radio ads over the last couple of days, one big thing is that when we're looking at victims, a lot of times we believe that victims are trafficked through force, like kidnapping and things like that. But that's not how it traditionally happens. A lot of times people are actually trafficked through a pretense of love. So if someone pretending that they love you, they're going to take care of you, they're going to do all these things, buy you things, spend time with you. And so one reason that people oftentimes don't report is they think that they're going to be reporting on someone who loves them or that they love. So of course they're not going to report. Some of the other issues that we know about is that they don't feel like people will listen to them. Like, who will believe me if I tell someone that this happened to me? Another big issue, though, a lot of times, Brian, is that they don't even know that they are being trafficked. Trafficking is something that we've just really started to talk about over the last several years. So people don't really truly understand what human trafficking is and that it is something that is actually impacting them all the time.
Wow.
Plus traffickers, they often a lot of times they tell them not to report, or that, if they talk to you or they talk to me, that what's going to happen is that we're going to not believe them. We're not going to help them. So in essence, they believe the trafficker.
Wow. So you touched on some very important subjects, but one that's really intriguing to me when you talk about the person that do not even know. Give me a little more intel into that. What is that like? Like, how do someone kind of get into that situation where they don't know, and what should someone do if they see it and they want to report that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things when we're thinking about trafficking, I know one thing is we think, for instance, like child abuse. We know what child abuse looks like, but one of the things when we're doing our trainings that we oftentimes tell people is human trafficking, when you're looking at youth, for instance, is the same thing as child abuse, but for profit. So you've now just attached financial gain to that, but it's still abuse. And so a lot of times people don't understand that that's what's happening to them. They may be in a relationship with, a boyfriend or girlfriend or some other person who they think is a significant other, and that person is saying, I love you, I care for you, I'm going to take care of you. And all the while they're abusing them and all these things are happening. It's the same way if someone's in a domestic violence situation and they have a hard time getting out because they feel like people they care, or it's going to be a little bit different if I just behave, or I just do what this person asked me to do, is going to be different. So when people are being trafficked, they kind of feel the same way, Brian.
Wow. So everybody complain about the new way of doing things, but luckily in today's world we can keep stats and stuff like that. So what parts of our society are more vulnerable to this?
Oh, good question. So we know that a lot of times, we can say that youth are the most vulnerable, and we know that about 50% of people who are trafficked are youth. And so, yes, they're definitely more vulnerable. And you'll hear from Kendra Underwood, the youth outreach coordinator, as well, talking a little bit more about all the reasons that youth are vulnerable. But the thing that people don't think about is that actually anybody is vulnerable to being trafficked, Brian. But I think when we look at the most vulnerable, it's also the people who are most vulnerable to things like domestic violence, child abuse, things like poverty. So it would be people who I always say are living on the margins. So you're not, considered the dominant culture or the dominant group. So we would think about people of color, people who identify as LGBTQI. We know that people who are immigrants, refugees, Also, people who have mental health issues or substance abuse, they use substances, or, they may have developmental disabilities. I think a lot of those things are some of the things that we see that traffickers really target in people, and use that to kind of make, to really traffic them.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that 2 years ago, the next question I have for you didn't even exist, but COVID-19 has affected everything in all forms. I'm sure it's affecting how you guys are handling your cases, tracking them down and stuff like that. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, COVID has really impacted the way that we do our work. One thing that we see is a lot of times now, agencies aren't able to do as much outreach as we used to do. So a lot of times, victims are having to kind of come forward a little bit more themselves. It's not us going out identifying people that we see, or we're looking at signs. A lot of times it used to be the schools, for instance, would report when they had a young person who was in front of them who also might have an issue with being trafficked. But now the schools don't necessarily all have the kids in, because some schools are back being virtual. And so people are hiding behind a screen. We also know that social media is being used even more so with COVID, because people are online all the time. And I think just looking at some of the financial issues that have come up because people are laid off from work, people are not home as much, or people are home even more. And so they're not with other people in the community as much. So people can't identify it.
Mm-hmm. I think I know the answer to the question, but I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. So would it be safe to say that social media has made it easier for the traffickers to find more victims and contact?
Well, absolutely. I think that, we've had cases where the whole case was based off of social media, where someone was trafficked through Instagram or Facebook or something like that. And, traffickers are using that as a tool to reach out to people. Have you ever been on social media and had random people sending you friend requests all the time? I mean, I know I've had that happen. And I think about our youth, they don't understand the dangers a lot of times in accepting those friend requests, or, actually talking to people that they don't know. So definitely it's increasing, and everything we're doing is playing out on social media these days, Brian.
Very scary, very scary. So let's say I suspect a friend of mine to be involved in this. Tell me what I should do. What are my steps? Who can I contact?
I mean, I think the first thing is, we always say our biggest thing is do no harm. So if you feel like someone is actually in imminent danger, you want to, of course, always call 911. But if you think that you suspect it and you need a little bit more information, you can always go online to our website and really look for specific information related to human trafficking. Or if you want to, you can also go to the National Human Trafficking Hotline's website. You can also, something very easy that they've created is you can text info to 233-733, and you can actually get specific information about human trafficking and kind of what it looks like in your local community.
Right. Now, what's that text number again? One more time.
So 233-7333. And then also, we always tell you, and I know it's always at the bottom of the screen, it's probably scrolling now, but just remembering that National Human Trafficking Hotline number to make sure that you're calling that number, but it's 1-888-373-7888.
Right. Last question, and let's talk directly to victims that's going through this right now. Give them some hope, give them some advice, and give them a couple of strategies in terms of how to get themselves out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many things, Brian, but I think one of the biggest things is that this isn't your fault. I think that that's something that a lot of victims take on, is that shame, that fear, the guilt that they have that, I got myself into this. You didn't know what was happening. Mm-hmm. And now that you do, the only thing we want to do is be there to help you. So reaching out to your local domestic violence, sexual assault agencies. There are also human trafficking programs in communities across the state. If you go onto our website, we have a list of all of the local agencies that can support victims. But I think the first step is really understanding that you're worth more, and that we do believe you and we will support you in taking that initial step, because at the end of the day, we can't make the step for the person. They have to make it for themselves.
That's right. Yeah, very good. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to touch on on this very important subject? I think we've covered a broad ground. I think we've talked to everybody, in terms of what they need to know. Is there anything else that you want to cover on this?
I think specifically for your listeners, Brian, I think it's always important to really talk about how it's impacting people of color the most.
Okay.
And we know that a large percentage of trafficking victims, actually the majority of trafficking victims, are people of color. We know in the United States right now, there's over 64,000 missing Black women and girls.
Wow.
And we know that a lot of that's due to human trafficking, and
Mhm.
people, there is a lack of media attention when we're talking about, Black women and girls going missing. Traffickers know this, Brian. They know
Right.
that. And so that's why those are the groups that they're targeting even more. So making sure that you're talking to other people, really educating your kids on what trafficking is and how to identify if someone is trying to get you involved in human trafficking and what to do if that happens, I think is really important.
Very, very powerful. I think we gave some great information today. Kiricka, you were wonderful. Thank you so much. Of course, I got to have you back. We're going to tackle this. January is definitely the month that we're highlighting this, but we're fighting this month by month, day by day. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Brian.
Thank you to everybody for joining us on Triangle Empowered.